August 15th, 1945, dawned over Hiroshima with a sky painted in pale grey streaks, the air heavy with the bitter smell of smoke, ash, and scorched wood. The city, once bustling with life, now resembled a graveyard, a silent testament to devastation. Buildings that had once reached proudly into the sky were reduced to skeletal frames of twisted metal and charred concrete. Streets were littered with broken furniture, torn fabrics, and shards of glass that glittered ominously under the dim morning sun. Families emerged cautiously from the shadows of what remained of their homes, their eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and disbelief. Children clutched empty bowls, some too weak to walk properly, their small faces streaked with soot and tears. Mothers tried to shield them, wrapping tattered cloths around their shoulders, but the hunger in the children's eyes could not be hidden. Each footstep across the debris-laden streets produced a hollow sound, echoing the emptiness that had settled in the hearts of the survivors. Rumors spread like wildfire that American soldiers had arrived. At first, no one believed it. The citizens of Hiroshima had been told to fear these foreigners, trained to see them as enemies. Memories of air raids, screams, and the sudden flash that had consumed the city days earlier were still vivid, almost unbearable. And yet curiosity overcame fear for some. A small group of children peeked from behind a partially collapsed wall, their wide eyes catching glimpses of uniforms, helmets, and the strange foreign language spoken in hurried tones. The soldiers carried crates, some marked with unfamiliar symbols, and yet there was no menace in their movements. The crates were heavy, laden with supplies, and the way the soldiers carefully set them down suggested something unexpected, not destruction. Not orders, but care. One soldier, a tall man with a calm demeanor, opened a crate to reveal rice in neat sacks, cans of meat, and small wrapped sweets that glimmered invitingly in the sunlight. A ripple of shock passed through the onlookers. Mothers whispered among themselves, disbelief etched into every line of their faces. Was this real? Could the soldiers, those who had been the cause of their fear, actually be here to help? Children, sensing the faint aroma of food, edged closer, drawn by instinct more than reason. The sound of tin cans clinking together and the soft rustle of burlap against concrete filled the air. A strange and almost alien music against the silence of devastation. The soldiers began calling softly to the children, their voices gentle, full of smiles and encouragement. One little boy, no older than 6, with a thin frame and hollow cheeks, stepped forward cautiously, holding out his empty hands. His eyes, wide and skeptical, flicked between the food and the soldier, unsure whether this kindness could be real. The soldier knelt slowly, carefully meeting the child's gaze, and offered him a piece of bread. There was no hesitation in the soldier's movements, no arrogance, only patience and warmth. The boy's lips trembled as he accepted it, tasting something that had been absent from his life for days. Mothers wept quietly, some letting the children approach, while still clutching their own empty bowls, overwhelmed by emotions too complex for words. The soldiers, in that moment, were not invaders but guardians, strangers reaching across the chasm of fear to offer hope, nourishment, and comfort. As more children gathered, the courtyard where the soldiers had stationed themselves began to fill with murmurs, giggles, and the soft rustle of movement. Soldiers handed out small packages of rice, carefully dividing portions among the children, sometimes squatting to meet their eye level, offering nods and smiles. Each interaction, though brief, carried a weight that transcended the mere act of giving food. In their calm, deliberate gestures, there was a message. You are safe, you are seen, and even in the ruins, humanity endures. Children who had not spoken since the day of the bombing began to whisper and then laugh softly, their voices tentative at first, but growing bolder with each passing minute. Mothers, hesitant at first, began to accept the generosity, their hands trembling as they reached for the supplies. The fear of betrayal slowly being replaced with a fragile trust. The courtyard itself, surrounded by collapsed walls and charred wooden beams, seemed to transform in those hours. The heavy air of despair was punctuated by the soft sounds of gratitude and the faint, lingering aroma of cooked rice and bread. Light caught on the silver tins of food, glinting like small beacons of hope, and children's hands brushed eagerly over the packages, their small fingers trembling with excitement and hunger. The soldiers spoke in broken Japanese, attempting phrases they had learned quickly, calling the children Okasan or Kodomo, their accents rough but their intentions clear. Every gesture, every word seemed to build a bridge, an invisible line of trust stretching across cultures, across pain, across fear. Elderly survivors who had spent the night wandering through ruins began to approach, their steps slow, measured, their eyes wide with astonishment. One old woman, leaning on a makeshift cane, approached a soldier with trembling hands, bowing low in a gesture of deep respect and gratitude. The soldier responded in kind, lowering himself slightly to meet her gaze, nodding solemnly as if acknowledging a shared pain and shared humanity. Around them, children and mothers continued to gather, forming a mosaic of hope against a backdrop of ruin. Even the animals that had survived the devastation, stray cats and birds, began to appear, attracted by the human movement and the scent of food. Completing the scene with a touch of life amidst desolation, the contrast was striking. Just days ago, the city had been filled with screams, the air heavy with smoke and the smell of fire. Now in this broken courtyard, there was laughter, cautious and fragile but real. Eyes that had seen horror were now widening in wonder, mouths that had been silent now forming words of gratitude. And in the midst of it all, the soldiers moved quietly, deliberately, ensuring that no child was left hungry, no mother without a morsel of hope. There was no grand announcement, no fanfare, only the simple, profound act of sharing what they had, of reaching out despite being enemies on paper. By mid-morning, the scene had grown even more remarkable. Families who had been too fearful to approach now edged closer, drawn by the tangible proof of kindness. Children clutched at each other, forming small lines, laughing nervously as soldiers passed out portions of rice and small tins of food. The soldiers' laughter, deep and warm, blended with the children's giggles, creating a surreal symphony of sound that seemed to defy the destruction surrounding them. In that courtyard, for the first time since the bombing, life felt possible again. There was no forgetting the devastation, no erasing the horror. But there was a glimmer of something far more powerful, a reminder that even amidst the darkest days, compassion could bloom, and as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the rubble, the city itself seemed to exhale. The children, once silent and fearful, now moved with energy and curiosity. Mothers whispered words of cautious gratitude. Soldiers continued their quiet work, never imposing, always attentive. Even the smallest gestures, a nod, a smile, a hand extended with a piece of bread, carried meaning that transcended language and nationality. That morning, in a broken courtyard amidst a shattered city, humanity revealed its enduring strength, not through weapons or orders, but through simple acts of sharing, kindness, and the courage to care. The morning light continued to filter through the haze of smoke and dust that clung stubbornly to the city. But in the small courtyard where the American soldiers had set up, a sense of cautious anticipation began to replace the fear that had gripped Hiroshima. Children, their small hands trembling with hunger and curiosity, edged closer to the soldiers. Drawn by the smell of freshly cooked rice, the scent of warm bread, and the glint of chocolate wrappers that seemed almost magical against the grey backdrop of ruin. Mothers hovered at the edges, their hearts pounding with a mixture of worry and hope, uncertain whether to trust the strangers in uniforms, yet unable to deny the desperate need in their children's eyes. The soldiers, noticing the hesitation, lowered their voices, gesturing gently, and beckoned the children forward with smiles that were patient, calm, and full of warmth. It was a delicate dance of trust, one small step at a time, as the survivors of unimaginable horror began to allow themselves to believe in the possibility of kindness. One little boy, so thin that his ribs showed faintly under his threadbare shirt, hesitated at the edge of the line. His eyes, dark and wary, darted from the soldiers to the food and back again, as if trying to measure whether the scene was real or some cruel trick. A soldier knelt down, his hands extended openly, speaking in slow, broken Japanese, "It's okay. You can take it." He pointed to a small loaf of bread, golden and fragrant, which seemed to the boy like a treasure from another world. The boy's small hand reached forward, almost shaking, and finally grasped the bread. The warmth of it pressed against his palm, tangible proof that this moment of kindness was real. He took a tentative bite, and the flavors, simple, nourishing, sweet, lit up his expression. For the first time in days, he smiled, the corners of his mouth curling upward in a way that seemed almost too fragile for the devastation around him. Other children followed suit, encouraged by their peers' bravery. The soldiers, working carefully and methodically, divided bowls of rice into manageable portions, each one handed over with a gentle nod or a comforting pat on the shoulder. Girls clutched their small sacks, eager to share morsels with younger siblings, while boys carried their portions cautiously, protective as if the food were the most precious object in existence. Mothers finally stepped closer, guided by a mix of hunger and gratitude, their hands shaking as they accepted cans of meat and small wrapped sweets. Some whispered prayers under their breath, bowing slightly, while others simply clutched the food and their children, overwhelmed by the realization that help could come from the unlikeliest of sources. A larger boy, perhaps 10 or 11, began to approach the soldiers with a small handmade cup, his expression a mix of fear and hope. The soldier nearest to him knelt, meeting his gaze steadily, and poured a small portion of rice into the cup, careful not to spill a single grain. The boy held it close to his chest, as if protecting it from a world that had taken so much from him already. The courtyard, once filled with silence and uncertainty, now hummed with soft laughter, tentative giggles and whispered words. Even the soldiers seemed to relax slightly, their smiles broadening as they witnessed the transformation around them. The children's hunger being replaced with joy, the mother's fear yielding to cautious relief. The air was filled not only with the smell of food, but also with the sounds of life returning in fragments. A cat, thin and mangy, slinked between the legs of the children, sniffing at the scraps that fell to the ground. Birds, drawn by the movement and the aroma, chirped cautiously from broken rooftops, adding a delicate musical layer to the scene. Every interaction between the soldiers and the children seemed to carry a deeper meaning, a wordless message that kindness could survive even in the aftermath of destruction. The children began to share their portions, offering pieces of bread to friends who had not yet received any, their small hands trembling but determined. Mothers began to exchange looks, nodding slightly at each other in silent acknowledgement that this moment was unprecedented, miraculous even in its simplicity and humanity. As the morning passed, the soldiers' patience never waned. They knelt for hours, ensuring that no child was left empty-handed, that every mother received a small portion of sustenance. Some soldiers began to gently engage the children in simple games, pointing and laughing, drawing giggles that rang out over the broken courtyard. The laughter was contagious, spreading from child to child, mother to mother, and even catching some of the soldiers themselves in moments of shared joy. For a fleeting time, the city seemed to forget its scars, the rubble of homes and streets fading into the background, as the focus shifted entirely to the human connection taking place in this small corner of devastation. A mother approached, one of the soldiers with a small doll, its fabric worn and frayed, offering it with a trembling hand as a token of gratitude. The soldier accepted it with care, nodding respectfully, and set it gently aside, acknowledging the gesture without diminishing its significance. It was a delicate exchange, a bridge between worlds, cultures, and circumstances that had been violently pulled apart just days before. Children watched closely, learning by example that trust and kindness could exist even where fear had once dominated. The soldier's actions, patient and deliberate, had begun to instill a fragile sense of hope that would ripple outward, transforming the energy of the courtyard from mere survival into a celebration of life reclaimed moment by moment. Elderly men and women, hesitant at first, began to step forward as well, some offering small words of thanks, others bowing deeply, their faces etched with both sorrow and relief. One man, leaning heavily on a cane, allowed himself to smile faintly, a rare gesture after days of witnessing death and destruction. The soldiers responded in kind, acknowledging the elders with bows and gentle nods. The courtyard, once a place of tension and fear, had become a sanctuary, a space where humanity had begun to reassert itself through the simple act of sharing food. Even the smallest gestures, a pat on the head, a smile, a carefully offered portion of rice, seemed to carry a significance that transcended the physical act, echoing in the hearts of those present as a profound declaration that life, care and hope endured. By mid-afternoon, the energy in the courtyard had transformed completely. Children ran lightly between the soldiers, laughing freely as they tasted candies, nibbled bread, and held rice in small, precious hands. Mothers exchanged quiet words of reassurance, allowing themselves to rest for a few moments as they observed the joy unfolding before them. Soldiers continued their work tirelessly, methodically handing out food, engaging gently with the children, and ensuring that no one was overlooked. The faint warmth of the sun, filtered through the lingering haze, illuminated a scene that seemed almost surreal in its beauty, a small oasis of life, laughter, and shared humanity in the middle of a city reduced to ashes. Even as the day wore on, the soldiers' actions remained consistent, patient, and deliberate. Every child received attention, every mother left with a small provision, and every gesture, no matter how small, contributed to a collective feeling of safety and trust. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the courtyard had become a symbol, not of destruction, but of resilience, compassion, and the quiet power of human kindness. It was a moment that would linger in memory, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest circumstances, a single act of generosity could ripple outward, restoring faith, igniting hope, and rekindling the fragile embers of humanity in hearts that had almost given up. The soldiers' presence, once met with suspicion and fear, had become a source of solace. Children held onto their portions with reverence, mothers whispered prayers of gratitude, and the elderly nodded quietly, acknowledging the unexpected kindness. The laughter, the chatter, and the faint music of life returning filled the air, creating a scene that defied the devastation surrounding it. The courtyard was no longer just a space. It was a microcosm of hope, a living proof that even amidst tragedy, the human spirit could find connection, comfort, and care. By the end of the day, the bonds formed in the courtyard between soldier and child, stranger and mother, giver and receiver, had created a network of trust that would resonate for years to come. It was more than food. It was reassurance, affirmation, and the embodiment of a simple truth. Even in a world broken by war, acts of compassion could shine through, illuminating the darkest corners and reminding all who witnessed them that humanity at its best knows no boundaries. As the day unfolded, the courtyard in Hiroshima had transformed from a quiet, cautious space into a lively, almost magical scene of human resilience. The soldiers continued their patient work, carefully handing out rice, bread, and tins of food, ensuring that no child or parent was overlooked. The children, emboldened by the gentle kindness of these unexpected visitors, began to interact with each other in ways they had not for days, sharing morsels, exchanging shy smiles, and even teaching each other games that required no equipment, just imagination and laughter. The sound of children's laughter echoed over the broken rooftops, cutting through the silence that had weighed so heavily over the city since the bombing. Mothers, watching their children, allowed themselves to release the tension they had carried. small smiles tugging at the corners of their lips as they noticed how much hope seemed to have returned in these few, simple hours. The courtyard was a patchwork of life amidst ruin. Children clutched bread and small portions of rice, occasionally spilling crumbs to the ground, which were quickly scooped up by tiny hands, eager not to waste even a single grain. Some children shared their food with siblings or friends who had been too shy to approach the soldiers, creating spontaneous acts of generosity that reflected the lessons of empathy these moments had inspired. The soldiers, observing this, smiled quietly, exchanging glances with one another as they witnessed the scene of community and care blossoming against the backdrop of destruction. Their presence had shifted the energy of the space entirely, from fear and distrust to trust, from despair to cautious hope, and from silence to laughter and conversation. Among the adults, small groups began to form, quietly speaking in low tones, observing the interactions between the soldiers and the children. The mothers exchanged whispered thanks with one another, offering subtle nods of solidarity and shared relief. Others were too overwhelmed by emotion, pressing their hands to their mouths to suppress soft sobs, tears running freely down faces lined with grief and exhaustion. Elderly survivors who had been wandering through the ruins for days in search of what little remained, now gathered in small clusters, watching with awe and disbelief as this scene unfolded. One elderly man, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, shook his head slightly, muttering under his breath about the impossibility of it all. Enemies showing kindness, children laughing in a city that had only known fear and loss. Yet even he could not help but smile faintly, a rare expression since the day of the bombing. The soldiers did not merely hand out food. They engaged with the children in subtle, meaningful ways. They knelt at eye level, gesturing for timid ones to come closer, offering quiet words of encouragement or lightly tapping a shoulder in reassurance. For children who had not spoken for days, whose eyes had been hollow with hunger and terror, these gestures were revolutionary. Small proofs that the world could be safe, that strangers could care. A little girl, clutching a small bowl of rice to her chest, wandered timidly up to a soldier and offered a shy bow. The soldier returned the gesture with a gentle nod, carefully adjusting her bowl to prevent spillage, his eyes soft with understanding. Around them the courtyard buzzed with movement, children laughing, mothers chatting quietly, soldiers working methodically to ensure that every small hand was fed. The atmosphere, though tinged with the memories of recent horrors, carried an almost tangible sense of community. Children began to teach each other games that required no toys, clapping, jumping, and inventing imaginary worlds where the ruins around them did not exist. Their laughter was tentative at first, but gradually it grew stronger, more confident, a ripple of joy that spread outward, touching everyone present. Mothers encouraged the children to play, stepping back from their vigilant watch to allow their offspring to explore the freedom of movement, even in small, cautious bursts. Some soldiers joined in quietly, clapping along or mimicking gestures, eliciting laughter and smiles from the children. It was a delicate but profound transformation, a small reclaiming of life in a place where life had been so violently disrupted. Elderly survivors, once isolated and despondent, began to participate as well, offering small smiles, gestures of approval, and even stories of the city before the bombing to the children who would listen. In these moments, a network of trust and connection was being woven between soldiers and civilians, between generations, between children and adults, a fragile but vital thread of humanity in the midst of chaos. Mothers, too, were drawn into these interactions, their eyes meeting the soldiers in unspoken acknowledgement of gratitude and relief. In quiet gestures, a hand on a child's shoulder, a nod, a bow, the ordinary act of giving food became extraordinary, a profound statement of empathy, resilience, and shared humanity. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the rubble-strewn courtyard, the energy remained vibrant, Children were now laughing openly, running between soldiers and mothers, sharing bread, rice and chocolate with friends and siblings. Soldiers continued their work patiently, aware that each act, no matter how small, carried significance far beyond its physical measure. Mothers encouraged their children to take what they needed, to share when they could, teaching lessons in generosity that paralleled the lessons of kindness being shown to them. Even in the midst of physical devastation, the courtyard had become a sanctuary, a space of nurturing, teaching, and restoration. One soldier noticed a boy sitting quietly at the edge of the courtyard, holding a small tin of food but too shy to eat. Kneeling beside him, the soldier whispered gently, offering a warm smile and a pat on the back. The boy looked up, hesitant, then finally nodded and took a small bite, his expression brightening with each chew. Witnessing these moments, mothers and onlookers felt a swell of relief and wonder, a reminder that humanity could endure even in the most dire circumstances. The courtyard, surrounded by broken walls and the echoes of loss, had become a place where hope could take root, where the most vulnerable were protected and nurtured, and where the power of simple acts of kindness reverberated with extraordinary impact. By late afternoon, the courtyard was almost unrecognizable from the desolate space it had been that morning. Laughter filled every corner, soft chatter carried across the ruins, and the aroma of bread and cooked rice lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of smoke and ash. Children exchanged their food, taught each other small games, and even began to create small drawings in the dirt with sticks, imagining worlds where the devastation around them no longer existed. Soldiers moved among them with quiet attentiveness, ensuring that each interaction was gentle, supportive and respectful. Mothers observed, a mixture of pride and relief in their eyes, recognizing that these moments would be remembered far longer than the hunger or fear that had dominated recent days. The courtyard had become a microcosm of resilience, illustrating how simple, deliberate acts of care could ripple outward, transforming not only the immediate scene, but the hearts of all who witnessed it. Children laughed again, mothers allowed themselves moments of rest, and soldiers quietly administered aid, each action contributing to a growing sense of community, trust, and recovery. Even the elders, who had initially lingered in the background, now felt the strength of the human spirit returning, encouraged by the joy of the children and the patience of the soldiers. It was a powerful demonstration that kindness could not be measured by grand gestures alone. It existed in the small, careful acts that acknowledged the humanity of others and offered sustenance, comfort, and hope. As the sun dipped lower, bathing the courtyard in golden light, the transformations that had occurred were undeniable. Children were smiling, playing and sharing, mothers were more relaxed, and soldiers' quiet diligence had turned a simple act of food distribution into an extraordinary lesson in empathy and trust. In the midst of rubble, ruin, and the echoes of destruction, a community had begun to heal, one morsel, one smile, and one gesture at a time. The courtyard, though surrounded by the scars of war, had become a living testament to the enduring power of compassion and human connection, a scene that would be remembered not for the devastation it had once contained, but for the hope, laughter, and humanity it now nurtured. As the afternoon faded into evening, the courtyard in Hiroshima had transformed completely from a place of fear and uncertainty into a sanctuary of light, laughter, and fragile hope. The American soldiers, still kneeling among the children and families, continued their careful work, handing out the last portions of rice, bread, and sweets with gentle patience. The children, their bellies now full for the first time in days, ran between the soldiers, laughing and sharing what they had received, their small voices ringing clearly over the rubble-strewn streets. Mothers, standing at the edges of the courtyard, watched with awe and disbelief, some wiping tears from their cheeks, others whispering prayers of gratitude to the sky above. The act of giving, simple yet profound, had grown into a powerful display of humanity that transcended the barriers of language, culture, and recent history. leaving everyone present with a sense of wonder at the unexpected kindness they had witnessed. In one corner of the courtyard, a group of children had begun to play a game invented on the spot, clapping hands, hopping over broken tiles, and laughing in carefree delight. The soldiers, observing quietly at first, were soon drawn in, mimicking the movements and eliciting peals of laughter from the children that seemed to echo endlessly across the damaged cityscape. Even the adults found themselves caught up in the joy, some nodding, some smiling, and some softly joining in by calling out encouragement or offering gentle guidance to the younger children. The atmosphere, once tense and wary, was now almost festive, a stark contrast to the silence and despair that had dominated the area just days before. For a moment, the past horrors seemed distant, eclipsed by the simple human joy of sharing, laughing, and connecting. One little boy, his face smeared with dust and ash, clutched a small loaf of bread as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. Hesitating at first, he approached a soldier, offering it timidly, as if he did not know whether such an act would be accepted. The soldier knelt, smiling gently, and accepted the bread with a soft nod, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy's eyes lit up, a combination of relief and pride, as he ran back to his friends, feeling the warmth of being understood and acknowledged. Around them, the courtyard was alive with small acts of generosity. Children sharing food, offering each other small pieces of chocolate, or helping the younger ones carry their bowls of rice. Mothers encouraged this behavior, softly speaking words of guidance and care, reinforcing the lessons of empathy that the soldiers' actions had already imparted. The soldiers, though weary from the long hours of distribution, never faltered in their patience or attentiveness. They knelt beside children who were hesitant, spoke gently to mothers who were cautious, and offered bows or small gestures of respect to the elderly who lingered at the edges of the courtyard. In these quiet, deliberate acts, the soldiers communicated something far more powerful than words. They communicated trust, compassion, and the recognition of shared humanity. Even the smallest gestures, such as adjusting a child's bowl to prevent spillage or offering a soft smile, carried immense significance, creating ripples of reassurance and comfort that spread outward to everyone present. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden light across the rubble and broken walls, the courtyard seemed to glow with an almost ethereal beauty. Children, now confident and playful, ran freely between the soldiers, mothers, and friends, their laughter mingling with the soft voices of the adults. The smell of freshly baked bread, the faint aroma of cooked rice, and the lingering scent of smoke created a complex tapestry of sensory memory, reminding everyone of both the destruction and the hope that now coexisted in the space. Even stray cats and birds, drawn by the movement and the food, added a living vibrancy to the scene, their presence small yet significant, reinforcing the sense of life slowly returning to the city. One elderly woman, her hands weathered and scarred by years of hardship, approached a soldier with a small handmade scarf, offering it as a gesture of gratitude. The soldier accepted it with care, gently nodding, and then set it aside respectfully. The woman's eyes glistened with tears, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and disbelief at the generosity she had witnessed. Children noticed the exchange and gathered around, asking questions in soft voices, their curiosity mingled with awe. Soldiers took the time to respond, pointing gently and offering explanations, ensuring that every child felt seen and understood. The courtyard had become a classroom of humanity, a place where empathy, kindness, and compassion were taught not through words alone, but through deliberate, caring action. As evening approached, shadows lengthened across the ruins, and the air cooled slightly, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke, dust, and the lingering aroma of food. Soldiers began to pack up the remaining supplies, carefully lifting crates and gathering wrappers, ensuring that the courtyard was left orderly, respectful, and free of waste. The children waved, some shyly, others exuberantly, their voices carrying across the broken streets, echoing off ruined walls. Mothers stood beside their children, waving as well, a mixture of pride, awe, and lingering fear in their expressions. The soldiers, now preparing to leave, gave final nods and smiles, acknowledging the deep connection that had formed in this small, extraordinary corner of the city. Even as the soldiers departed, the impact of their presence lingered. Children clutched their bowls and loaves tightly, sharing with friends and siblings, creating small pockets of joy and sustenance that would last into the night. Mothers whispered soft words of reassurance, encouraging children to rest, eat slowly, and remember the lessons of generosity and kindness they had witnessed. Elderly survivors, leaning on canes or makeshift supports, exchanged nods of mutual understanding, recognizing that this unexpected kindness had created something that would ripple outward through the community, even after the soldiers had gone. The courtyard, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a symbol of resilience, hope, and the extraordinary capacity of humans to care for one another, even in the aftermath of unimaginable devastation. The sun set completely, bathing the city in deep oranges and purples, reflecting off the jagged edges of ruined buildings and broken streets. Children, now quiet and content after their day of play and nourishment, sat with their mothers, holding each other close. The laughter and chatter that had filled the air gradually softened into a peaceful calm, yet the warmth and connection created during the day remained palpable. Soldiers, now at a distance, paused to look back, witnessing the scene one last time, a small courtyard filled with hope, resilience, and humanity that would linger far longer than the fleeting presence of the visitors. In that quiet moment, the courtyard became more than a physical space. It became a memory, a story, a testament to the power of simple acts of compassion. Even amidst the ruins of Hiroshima, amidst the shadows of loss and destruction, the day had proven that kindness could endure, that trust could be rebuilt, and that human connection could flourish against all odds. Mothers, children, and elders alike would carry this experience in their hearts forever, a beacon of hope and a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity could shine. And as night fell, the city seemed to exhale, cradled in the quiet knowledge that love, care, and courage could survive and even thrive, leaving a legacy that would echo through generations.